So for a long time, I've had a really strong interest in daguerreotypes, and I've always wanted to make them. So relatively recently, I've gotten myself set up to be able to start exploring that process. One of the primary obstacles when you're getting started with daguerreotypy, or when you're making them in general, is access to plates. So recently, I've been getting a lot of questions directed my way because I do my own electroplating of my plates at home. Plates can be prepared for daguerreotype in a couple of different ways. Primarily, you're either going to be working with traditionally clad plates, which are exceedingly difficult to get a hold of these days, or you're going to be working with electroplated plates. For folks who aren't working with clad plates, or when those clad plates aren't available, electroplating becomes the other solution. Most folks send cut copper plates out to industrial electroplaters to have them plated for them. Because realistically, when you're already working with the daguerreotype process, which is incredibly nuanced and demands absolute attention at every step of the process, it isn't always practical to add on this whole other process to your workflow. But what a lot of folks are finding is sometimes there are major delays with even the industrial electroplating services, and that can just be an obstacle in and of itself. So I decided in the end that I was going to just figure out how to electroplate my own plates to get started. And so I've been electroplating all of my plates myself, and I've got a pretty decent handle on the process, and the product of my plating process has been very good. It's actually exceeded my expectations, and it's been exactly what I've needed to really get started with the process. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my process for cutting down copper plates and then silver electroplating them. I hope this is useful to some folks and provides an option. It's not going to be for everyone, but it works, and it might be exactly what you need to get started. So let's get into it. I'm going to list out all of the materials and equipment that you need to do this, and I will drop those into the video description below. I'm also going to write up a tutorial on how to do this and publish this on my website. When that's done, I'll also add that to the links in the video description below. So to get started with cutting your copper plates, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need a copper plate. I've already cut some plates out of this. This is an 8x10 sheet of 24 gauge copper, which is a fairly thin copper, but I found that it's a copper that's easy to work with and easy to cut. It's not too flimsy. It doesn't easily deform. You may end up preferring to go with thicker copper plates over time. That's probably where I'm going to end up going, but I have a bunch of this, so I'm just using it for now. I wouldn't really recommend going much thinner than 24 gauge, but you can try it out, see if it works for you. The thinner it is, obviously, the easier it's going to cut, but also the easier it's going to deform. These sheets are not perfectly polished. They're decently polished, but you're going to need to surface the copper and polish it before the plating process anyway, which I'll go into. Leave the protective film over the copper sheet for the whole cutting part of the process so that the little shards and pieces of copper that come off during the cutting don't mar the surface. The more you mar the surface, the more you're going to have to surface it before you plate. So you're going to need your copper, a ruler, a cutting surface. This thing down here is called a bench pin with clamp, and that allows you to clamp the bench pin onto your working surface, and it works as a guide to help you cut in a straight line and to help you have control over the copper as well as your saw. And speaking of the saw, you will need a jeweler's saw with a blade and any metal screwdriver, and this is just going to be used to help smooth down the burr after we've cut the plate. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take your ruler and measure out the dimensions of the plate that you want to cut. Now I've already gone ahead and done that, and the plate will be 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 inches. So I've gone ahead and I've measured that out, and I'm going to get started with setting it up on the bench pin and cutting it. So to start cutting, you're going to take your copper plate and you're going to rest it onto the bench pin. I would encourage folks to watch YouTube videos on how to cut copper sheets. There's a lot of really great jewelers and craftspeople out there who can provide a better explanation of how to do it than I probably can, but I'm going to show you how I do it, and then you can go from there. You brace the copper, and to start cutting, you're not going to want to just lay the saw into the copper and start cutting. You need to create a little bit of a groove so that you know where you're going to begin, and you have control over how the saw cuts. So the way that I do that is you find your line and you place the blade onto that line, and you draw the blade up, which is the opposite direction of the teeth. You just draw that blade up, and it'll create a little bit of a groove in there that'll be very easy for the blade to fit into and begin the cutting process. So once I have that little bit of a groove, I place the blade there and I start moving in little swipes, and you're applying just a little bit of pressure on the downstroke, and then you're releasing that pressure on the upstroke, because you're not cutting on the upstroke, you're only cutting on the downstroke. So I will go in and start cutting my line. If I find that I'm going off the line, or I'm starting to kind of sway a little bit, you can release your pressure for the most part and kind of just saw in place, but I'll start to turn the blade so that the blade can course correct and get back onto the line. I'm also cutting at this kind of 45-ish degree angle, and it moves through the copper better than any other angle that I've tried. You'll also notice on the long side of the plate, as I get closer to the end, I'm tilting the blade more and more, and that's making sure that I just allow the body of the saw to actually clear. That worked great, and you can see all my edges are very nice, very straight. And so now I will take the screwdriver, and you just, using your hand to brace it, you just, with a moderate amount of pressure, rub it along that edge. And do that for each of your edges. And that's actually folding your burr down. And I'm going to do it on both sides. But so there, the plate is cut. So the next thing that you're going to need is a drill. I'm using a drill with a 1/16 drill bit, and what I'm using that for is to drill a couple of small holes into two corners of the plate. Those holes are going to be used to hook in copper wire that's going to be used to hang the plate into the electroplating tank. So here I have my drill. I'm going to just put a couple of dots where I want to drill my holes. You want to kind of use your finger and your fingernail to guide the bit to the point on the plate where you want to put it. Otherwise, you're going to risk moving it around too much, and you might actually cause the tip of the bit to move around and scratch part of the surface of the plate. These areas where these holes are is well out of the image area anyway, but you still want to kind of just be careful and as safe as you can to prevent marring the plate. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I've taken my copper plate that I've cut, I've removed the protective film, and I'm going to affix this to a support base, and this can be really any kind of just piece of wood or acrylic or something. I'm going to attach this to this using some double-sided tape so that it's held in place, and I'm going to begin surfacing and polishing this. Different copper plate is going to arrive with a different level of finish. Sometimes you can get an almost mirror finish plate provided from like an engraver's supply or something like that. Other times they're a little bit duller, so depending on what the surface condition is will determine where you need to start in terms of grit of sandpaper. In this case, I'm taking a guess just based on where this is at, and I'm going to start with an 800 grit wet dry sandpaper. I am going to moisten it with Windex, which sounds a little weird, but that's actually a method that is commonly used by knife makers when they do a high polish on a knife surface. Windex contains materials that help to pull up residue and works a little bit better than just plain water. Alright, so I've gone through the steps now. I started off with a 600 grit, I went to 800, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, and then 10,000 grit. Then I moved on. I swapped out the sandpapers on the sander, and I added a little chamois with a felt backing on it. And I used a little bit of New Shine. This is New Shine 2 Grade S metal polish. After that, I added a little bit of lamp black and polished that as well. And I've got a really nice, very reflective mirror finish on this copper. And this will be good as a starting point for establishing the silver layer once we put it into the silver electroplating solution. All right, and now what I'm doing is making sure to clean the front and back of the plate really well. At my first go, I use denatured alcohol, and then I also go in with some acetone nail polish remover, and I clean it really well, always starting at the front of the plate first so that I'm not bringing anything from the back of the plate to the front of the plate. And then I'm going to wash this with soap and water and dry it. You want to make sure that it's very clean because you don't want to be transferring any of the residue from the surfacing and polishing steps into the plating solution. And you'll know that you've got the plate chemically clean or very close to that when you run some water on the plate and pour it off and it just sheets off with absolutely no beading. If you put water onto the plate and you let the water run off and it sticks in droplets to the plate, then the plate still has residue on it. So you need to continue your cleaning process. And once you run water on it and it just sheets off like that, then you've got the plate clean. And then I'm going to pour distilled water on the back first and then the front. And I'm pouring that distilled water on there and washing it with the distilled water. I'm doing that to help reduce any kind of water spots when it dries down. And so now what I have is this really beautiful, completely mirror finished piece of copper. Okay, so I'm now getting ready for the electroplating step. I'm going to walk through the materials and equipment that are used. There are a number of different ways that you can do this. You can go really extreme and use all kinds of highly technical pieces of equipment for this. I'm showing you how I do it in a way that is very easy and straightforward to get set up at home and doing it quickly. And so I'll show you how I'm going about doing that. The first thing that you're going to need is a rectifier, which is a device that helps you control the voltage and amperage of the current that you're using for the electroplating process. I also have some copper wire here. This is a 16 gauge copper wire. I use that to make little hooks that are then taped to a little popsicle stick. And those hooks are what my copper plate is hooked onto for the electroplating process. I also have two little popsicle sticks just taped together here. These are going to hold my anodes. So I have a silver anode. This is pure 99.9% pure silver. And I have a stainless steel anode. I will go over what those are used for in a moment. I have the electroplating solution that I'm using. Right now I'm using Krone's silver electroplating solution, and I found that this works well. I will be testing a few other solutions, so maybe somewhere down the line if I find something that works better than this, I'll make an update for this video. I have a small glass Pyrex dish with distilled water in it. I also have this rectangular glass vessel. I think it's just a rectangular flower vase of some sort, but this is a fairly thick rectangular glass vessel that I'm using as my plating tank. And I have my vent hood, which is very important because the silver electroplating solution contains both potassium cyanide and silver cyanide. And during the electroplating process, when the current is being run, small bubbles will be produced, and those bubbles are hydrogen cyanide gas in very small amounts. The silver electroplating solutions that you can buy commercially for home use are much more dilute than those that are used in industrial applications. My understanding, and I might be somewhat off in my numbers here, but my understanding is that the solutions used in industrial applications are like 15% cyanide and higher. This solution is around a 1% solution, so it's much more dilute, but it still does produce small amounts of hydrogen cyanide gas during the process. So it's important that you're either outside in a completely ventilated area doing this process, or that you're in a lab, darkroom, or facility that is adequately equipped with proper ventilation to evacuate any hydrogen cyanide gas that's produced during this process. I can tell you from personal experience, due to a mishap that I had, you do not want to be ingesting any level of a hydrogen cyanide gas. It will make you very sick, and at high enough volumes, it will kill you very quickly. So please take that as the most serious word of warning in this process. But overall, these home electroplating solution kits are rather safe to use as long as you're using proper safety precautions. Now, before I begin, because I won't be talking as I'm doing the process because I need to focus on each of the steps, I'm going to give a quick overview of what exactly I'm going to be doing. The copper will be removed from the silver plating vessel, and it will be filled with the electroplating solution. I'm going to insert my stainless steel anode into the solution connected to the positive terminal of the rectifier. I'm then going to connect the negative terminal of the rectifier to the copper wire that the copper plate is hanging off of. And I'm going to have that ready in my hand. The rectifier will then be set to a voltage of 5 or 6 volts. That is being used for what's called the silver strike process. If you were to place the copper directly into the plating solution without any current running, you'll be able to watch a reaction begin to occur because of the natural conductivity of the copper. We don't want that to happen though. That's something called immersion plating. And immersion plating is counterproductive to our purposes. Immersion plating is weak, and it creates a very weak foundation for the remainder of the silver that's being deposited onto the copper. It's like building a skyscraper on a foundation of toothpicks. If you were to allow that to happen, your final plating is going to be weak and it may flake. So that's where the silver strike process comes in. The rectifier will be set to 5 or 6 volts. As I mentioned, the positive terminal will be connected to the stainless steel anode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the rectifier while the stainless steel anode is already connected. And with the copper connected to the negative terminal of the rectifier and the rectifier turned on, so voltage is being applied, I'm going to then place the copper into the tank. And it's only going to be in there for around 15 to 30 seconds or so, or as long as it takes to just take on a whitish color. There will be bubbles, more bubbles in this part of the process than in the actual silver plating part of the process. Placing it into the tank with voltage already applied at this higher voltage of 5 to 6 volts is going to allow the silver to more readily adhere to the copper and create a strong foundation for the rest of the silver plating process. After 15 to 30 seconds, or however long it takes for it to get a nice white color to it, I'm going to remove this from the tank and I'm going to put it into this dish of distilled water as a rinse. After that, I'm going to turn down the voltage on the rectifier to 2 volts, which is the general voltage that I'm using for the actual silver electroplating process. So once the rectifier is turned down to 2 volts, I'm going to swap out my stainless steel anode for the pure silver anode. So the pure silver anode will be connected to the positive terminal of the rectifier, and the copper will remain connected to the negative terminal of the rectifier. And with the voltage on, this will go back into the tank with 2 volts being applied to it. That will remain in the tank for 10 minutes. I'm going to watch that process and make sure nothing weird is going on. At the end of 10 minutes, I'm going to remove it from the tank. It'll go back into the distilled water, and then I'm going to repeat that process one more time. With the rectifier still set to 2 volts, it'll come out of the distilled water, back into the tank for another 10 minutes. Generally, it's recommended that you just do 1 plating for 10 minutes, depending on application. I found that for my plates, I like to do 2 applications for 10 minutes. I'm doing that because this is a daguerreotype plate, and we're going to have to surface and further polish the plate after silvering to get it to a silver mirror finish. And I like to use my plates as much as I possibly can until I get a good one. And I found that my process for electroplating using that double silver plating process gives me a plate that the last plate that I made, I was able to reclaim the plate and reuse it for the daguerreotype process somewhere between 14 to 16 times, which I was really surprised I was able to do with a process like this. That's something that typically only comes along with professionally electroplated plates or clad plates, but I've been able to achieve it with this process. So I'm sticking with what works for me. So after all of that, once we're done, we're going to have a plate that's going to be a silverish color, but it'll be mostly white. And that white deposit is the pure silver. After that, the plate can be rinsed in distilled water and washed, and then set aside until you're ready to polish the plate. From that point on, you're into the daguerreotype process. You're going to polish the plate to a silver mirror finish, and then you can make your daguerreotype plates with that. All right, so that's the process, and now the finished result is this white silver-plated copper plate for daguerreotype. Now, as I mentioned before, the plate is white and it does not have a mirror finish right now, but that's just because it needs to be surfaced and then polished out, which is just a general part of the daguerreotype process that if you're doing this, you're probably already familiar with. Using this particular electroplating method, I do not recommend polishing the plate with new shine. New shine will cut through a lot of the silver and it will reduce the number of reclamations that you can pull from this plate if you need to reuse it. It may actually just go straight through the silver and take it right off. I can't really explain why new shine acts on this as aggressively as it does, but I just know it from my own use, so I wouldn't recommend using the new shine on this. I would stick with rotten stone, red iron oxide or rouge, and lamp black for surfacing and polishing these plates. But they will polish down to a mirrored surface. That will be great for daguerreotype. So I'm not set up with a great viewing environment here right now, but this is a Becquerel daguerreotype that was made using a plate that was plated using this silver electroplating process. And it does what I need it to do. If this is something that you're trying to get into and you're unable to find plates, it definitely provides plates that are usable for the process.